First of all, I love this guy. I wish he could introduce me all the time. He's fantastic. Thank you, Don Trees. All right, we're in business. Everybody looks so great. It's great to be at this vantage point and see everyone today. I have so much that I want to cover, and I'm going to do the best to get through everything, being mindful of our time. So I'd like to start with 3 specific topics here today. And I'm going to talk to you about how I believe they're interconnected and how they play a really crucial role in the work that we do. Design, creativity, and diversity, the 3 topics I'd like to talk to you all about today. And as far as I'm concerned, they're interconnected. Design needs creativity, and creativity fundamentally flourishes when there's diversity. Hopefully, you can follow along with that thinking as well. I'll take you through the depths of that in a bit. First, I want to focus on creativity. And so I'm going to ask for your participation in a quick exercise. You don't have to write anything down. You can kind of store this in your mind. And I'm going to ask you to think about creativity in a way that's personal. Think about how it is that you see creativity on 4 facets. So it's going to be a bit of a fill-in-the-blank exercise. Ready? All right. I'd like for you to envision the most creative person in an adjective or 2. Just think about that for a second. The most creative process. The most creative place. And then finally, the most creative product. So on 4 different facets, we'll come back to that a little bit later. I'd like to move on to the next area, which is that of design. And I think we all can recognize that design is multifaceted, very much in the same way that creativity is. And if we just take a step and think about, wow, what are all of the various professions represented in the room, in the different industries? We can come with a list yay long, right? There's environmental design, communication design, service design, the list goes on and on. The work that I focused on was that of graphic design or communication design. And that's where my research is grounded. However, I will say that the topics that I'm going to share with you today are likely applicable across the fields. Design is color. It is type. It's form. Design is pattern. It's product. Design is symbol. You know I had to give a shout out to Prince, right? Okay. Design is visceral and academic. Design is serendipitous and systematic. It is style and it's substance. And along with all these characteristics that we know design to be, it's also full of characters, right? So some of our favorites, Milton Glaser, designers Paul Rand, Michael Beirut, Massimo Vignelli. Designers Paula Scher, Stefan Sagmeister, and of course, Jessica Walsh. And again, while we know these characters that make up the field, I'd like to ask you to widen your lens and think beyond what we know and what's been popular. Design is messy. So Martha Scotford, she's a designer, also a writer, and she proposed a thinking, kind of a shift in our thinking, I should say, around what design is. She wrote an essay called Messy History versus Neat History. And in that essay, messy history is meant to identify the female role, which has been oftentimes sidelined in the dominant kind of culture of design, and juxtaposes that with neat history, the conventional thinking around design being a male profession. Design is gathered, it's cultivated, and it's nurtured. These are the words of Ellen Lupton, well-known curator, writer, design critic, and also Haycock McKellar, a writer and professor and also designer. And they put together what I believe is a seminal piece called Underground Matriarchy. Would definitely encourage you all to read that, a couple decades ago. And their focus there was about the feminine approach to design. And that approach really looks at stepping away from the kind of rigid canon of order and accuracy that we know design to be, and embracing a more subjective and flexible way of using and thinking about design. Design is Don D. White. I don't know if anyone's familiar with his work, but Don D. White gloriously painted New York City subway surfaces top to bottom with his lettering style that ultimately reshaped the face of graffiti. And in his own words, he used ungoverned creativity to do so. And design is Dapper Dan, meaning design is fresh, right? So Dapper Dan showed us and styled for us a different way of looking at fashion 30 years before Gucci claimed it fashionable. Some new faces and characters to go along with the widening of our lens, the widening of the aperture. Designer Sylvia Harris, proponent of social and civic design. George Olden, one of the very first Black creative executives in advertising. Bobby C. Martin, one of the newer generations, co-founder of OCD. I believe he's also a speaker here at AIGA. It's academic. Dr. Dory Tunstall, she's a design anthropologist and dean. And design is award-winning Eddie Opera designer at Pentagram. Design is also the 23 designers that I had the opportunity to interview. 18 of them were Black. And I had the opportunity to really bring their perspectives to the table and make sure that they were given the right type of acknowledgement and recognition. These are the folks that inspire the B.O.L.D principle, and these are the folks that I'd like you to look at as part of our community. This is where diversity comes into play. I think fundamentally we're hearing a lot of talk about diversity more and more, and I think if we think just simply about the idea of diversity, you think, sure, diversity sounds good, it morally sounds right, but it also is really critical to pushing ourselves and looking at perspectives that are unlike our own. I have to definitely pay homage to Cheryl D. Miller. I had an opportunity to speak with her about a year ago when I started my own research on this topic. And Cheryl Miller wrote, at least about 30 years now, an article entitled Black Designers Missing in Action. And in this article, she asked the question, where are the Black designers? Why is there such a lack of them in the field? And then proposes scenarios in which we can start to change that imbalance. I will tell you that today, the percentage of Black designers in the field is still small. I can't even give you a number because it is so difficult to quantify Black designers inside of communication design in the United States. I can reference, though, for you a quantity just to help ground us a bit in understanding the lack of Black designers in the field. So AIGA did a study about a year ago, I believe in 2016, a survey in which they got together a pool of over 9,000 designers, asked them various questions around what they do from a professional standpoint, questions around salary. And of that pool, I'd actually like to ask, of that pool, How many do you think were black, just percentage-wise? Anyone want to throw out a number? 2%, very close, 3%. Same difference, I think. I think we oftentimes hear a lot about designers being problem solvers. So let's take this particular issue and let's figure out how we can actually design against it. Couple of things I wanted to point out, because I made a blanket statement a little earlier saying that, sure, creativity needs diversity. But this is really grounded in academics and grounded in studies that have been done. One study done by Scott Page about 3 years ago now, where he examines cognitive diversity. And in his examination of cognitive diversity, it's really clear that when we're met with complex problems, we absolutely need diversity of perspective. But he also says that identity matters too, right? So diverse identities often translate into diverse perspectives and heuristics. Then if we want to look at this and kind of get into that whole ROI, a word that I think we all know in-house, it gets thrown around a lot. There are financial ties that we can also make to diversity. McKinsey put out a study 2 years ago in a piece called Diversity Matters. And in that piece, it shows the tie to diversity and a firm's financial performance. There is a linear relationship between ethnic and racial diversity and better financial performance. What I'd like to do just for a couple of minutes is share with you all a quick video that goes into more detail around my research and some of the findings. Okay, I could listen to that all day. I just love that track. But I want to keep us moving given the time that we have. So what I'd like to do is just dig into the four facets that you saw proposed in the principle a little bit further, because doing so will also give us the opportunity to think about what are the actions we can now do, right? So just quickly, just to sum up what you saw in the video, these are kind of the four findings that were the focus of the research. And I will say, they may not be wildly unique, right, or groundbreaking. But what's important about the findings were the areas of emphasis that the Black designers brought to the table. And that's going to be what I want to talk about a bit further. So on the facet of the person, this idea of needing to have the ability to bring ideas to life, really transform ideas, was definitely heard over and over and over again. And having the relentlessness to do so was a part of that equation. And so for us, I think the question becomes, if we're leaders here in the room, how do we then empower our teams? But even if you're sole contributors and team members, how do you need to be empowered, right? And how maybe can you look at taking the reins of the groups that you're in to feel that you can have a certain level of influence and power in the teams that you're working in. On the facet of process, so this idea of kind of an incubator, having enough time to think about ideas and wrestle through them was really crucial, and also the harmony of the process in the place, meaning that the place had to be conducive to process. And so for us, the question becomes, well, how can we develop environments that are the most conducive to our process? On the third facet, that of the place, I think this is a really crucial one that I want to spend a bit of time on. So in particular with Black designers, what I heard over and over again was having a place where they could feel that they weren't being threatened in terms of their identity, and also being able to be in a place that was one where it was clearly open, but open in a way that meant that other diverse types could also be in that place. And I think these kind of ideas around diversity and freedom of identity matter to all of us, right? It just was something that really was prominent in the responses of these designers. And so the question for us is, how do we develop places that embrace safety, freedom, and diversity for all? And then lastly, on the note of product, I will say here I was a little disappointed because I was hoping to hear something groundbreaking, but frankly, I think as professionals in the room, we adhere to canon. We adhere to standards, what we learn in school, it's what we see around us. And so the answers and responses around the optimal products when it comes to design being functional and also having form that follows that function really shouldn't be surprising. However, I think there's opportunity here for us. And it's opportunity to look at perhaps our measures a little bit differently and ask, well, how can we explore unconsidered forms of evaluation? I asked a lot of how questions. That's because I think this is work we can get done. And the area of the facet of place that I mentioned that I want to talk a bit more about, we have to look at place on two dimensions. I think first, place means the teams we work in and our actual design fields, but it also goes beyond that. Place is the American place that we exist in, right? So when we come to work, we don't drop all our baggage outside of the door, right? We have our identities that we bring into our spaces. And so that means being sensitive about that, but it also means understanding that perspectives are going to range the gamut. And they're also going to be heightened based on what we are dealing with currently and what we know historically has shaped the way in which we interact, the way in which we perceive each other. I'd like us to start, though, with our teams, because it can be really a gargantuan task to say, okay, let's tackle all of society, let's deal with the inequities that we know exist. Why don't we start with ourselves, with each other? And that's really my proposal today, is that there's opportunity for us to connect beyond kind of what we've considered and normalized as popular, look beyond popular characteristics and canons and characters that make up our field, and connect fundamentally to each other. We can do this in our teams. right? The work that I showed you today doesn't necessarily have to fall flat. You could ask your teams about how they view creativity, how they understand and perceive of design, and I'm sure that you'll at least hear some moments that may not be quite the same as the ones you already have in your mind. Look, fundamentally, diversity and inclusion is a good thing. I'm not saying that we shouldn't propose to go beyond just our teams and look at what we can do and change in society, but I think the reality is we're the ones doing the work. And so the reason I talk about going beyond diversity and inclusion is that it has kind of become a bit of a buzzword and a bit of a word that people say in organizations to show that they're fighting the good fight, but it has to trickle down to the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. And so I propose that that work is the work that we can do together when we just talk to our teams, when we ask them questions, when we have a space that allows for freedom and safety. In-house fundamentally is inclusive. And whether it's the way you have to work with your internal clients or business partners, the way you work with your team, that is fundamentally a collaborative operation. And so it follows suit that the way our team should be developed, the way that we work with our counterparts, fundamentally should be inclusive as well. So I'd like to leave you with a couple of thoughts around how it is that we can redesign the way in which we uphold whatever standards that we have in our teams, but also in terms of the way we bring on new talent, the way we recognize that talent, who's fundamentally represented in the field, and say that it really should represent all of us. Last year, Cheryl Miller came back to this topic in an article titled "Black Designers Still Missing in Action." And the truth is, it's still a problem. Black designers still are missing in the field, but there are more and more of them. And the kind of dynamic and the shift to actually start to highlight these designers needs to happen in a way in which they're represented, which they're brought to the surface, which we connect with them so that they become just as well known as a Paul or Cher. I wanted to share some organizations that are doing the work. Revision Path, highlighting Black designers through podcasts. They also have a job board that you can check out. JobWell as well is a great resource for hiring. Design and Diversity, a conference that just started focusing on the topics. They also, I believe, have a podcast. Add Color recognizes and honors leaders in the field who are doing the work inside of the creative industries. Fantastic work, and making sure they get the recognition. And then Here Are All the Black People out of one club is a multicultural fair that makes sure that talent of all backgrounds is represented. So remember in the very beginning when we did that quick exercise? I guess my question for you today is to think about if any of your viewpoints have changed in the last 20 minutes. And think about, if they have, imagine what could happen over longer periods of time. Talking to people who are different than us. Having purposeful connection. And I think that would mean for us that we can fill in this blank a bit differently. Thank you all for your time.